Today we're taking a look at something I think is really timely, this whole idea of thinking in creative systems.
Yeah, it's a fascinating lens. We've got this source material from an author who really digs into systems from all sorts of angles.
Right. It pulls from creative work, but also like Gaia theory, history cycles, even brain science. It's quite a mix.
Definitely diverse.
The fundamental starting point in the sources is pretty clear. Systems are important.
The argument is that artists, well, really anyone making things or trying to figure things out, should probably study them or at least be mindful of them.
And there's this powerful idea right at the start that working within a creative system lets you keep creating, potentially forever.
Well, indefinitely, yeah. That's the concept. Instead of just doing one project, then stopping, then starting another.
You build a framework.
Exactly. A framework that allows the work to just keep flowing. The sources mention things like creating series or having a dedicated system like the Song Day idea. Making a song becomes like a regular practice, not just a goal to hit.
Ah, okay. So it's really different from, say, making a New Year's resolution that's tied to the calendar.
Totally different. Resolutions often fail because they aren't really systems. They're goals without an underlying process sometimes. A creative system takes that pressure off.
Right. Any day can be day one again.
Yeah. And the idea is that this systemic work can become a kind of tradition. And traditions, well, they're systems. You don't resolve a tradition, you just do it. They aren't meant to change drastically.
So they don't need that resolution endpoint. Interesting.
And building on that, the author talks about their own music making. It's not about just adopting, say, jazz standards or classical forms.
Prepackaged systems.
Right. It's about designing a system specifically for their ideas, using the system itself as a way to explore.
So the system becomes the vehicle for discovery, not just the rules of the road.
That's a good way to put it. And the sources highlight two main strategies people use within these creative systems. They often work together, actually.
Okay, what are they?
So one is deliberately imposing constraints.
Like limiting your color palette if you're painting.
Exactly. Or in music, sticking to a certain key or time signature. The point made is that these constraints aren't just limiting. They're often needed to actually finish something. To resolve the piece when pure free-form exploration might just go on forever.
Right, they give it shape, boundaries.
Yeah. And then the flip side is free experimentation. Just diving in, intentionally trying not to follow rules, just seeing what happens.
Pure exploration.
And the suggestion is that really effective work often comes from finding your place somewhere on the spectrum between those two. It's not always strictly one or the other.
Finding that sweet spot between structure and freedom.
And they use their Sum 2 and Sum 3 albums as an example of this. They call it an ecosystem.
An ecosystem? How so?
Well, songs could appear in shorter forms on one album, maybe extended versions on the other. They could kind of move between the albums, interact.
Ah, I see. Like different life forms in the same environment.
Exactly. And this connects to something apparently Bowie talked about, that the real art wasn't just making the individual songs, but building the whole system for making the music, the infrastructure.
Building the world for the art. Yeah, that fits perfectly with this systems thinking.
Now, to give us a broader toolkit for understanding systems, the sources delve into a whole range of theories and models. These aren't things the author invented, but frameworks they use to make sense of systems at different scales.
Right. This is where we see just how broad this approach can be.
Let's start really big. Gaia theory comes up.
The Earth as a living system.
Kind of, yeah. But specifically in the context of adaptation. So climate change isn't just framed as something humans are doing to the planet.
But as a process between us and the planet?
Exactly. A co-adaptation process between the huge Earth system and the human system within it. We're part of this dynamic exchange.
Okay, got it. What else?
Then there's the fourth turning. This theory views history in cycles.
Like seasons?
Yeah, that's the metaphor. It might suggest we're currently in a sort of winter or challenging phase, but embedded in that is the idea that spring renewal eventually comes back. The sources point out that these natural Earth cycles are like a top-level metaphor we use to understand lots of things.
Including ideology.
Including ideologies, yeah. They seem to have their own cycles or phases, too. So looking at these big natural or historical patterns gives us a way to maybe understand social shifts.
A framework for seeing the patterns. What about more human-scale systems?
Well, there's Edward Hall's high and low context model.
High and low context.
Think of something like the Academy Awards ceremony. It's super high context, right? full of subtle cues, who sits where, what's not said.
Right. You have to interpret everything.
Exactly. You have to read the tea leaves, decode the high context, just to get the basic low context information like who actually won the award. The system of the event itself carries a lot of the meaning.
The medium is part of the message, in a way.
Sort of, yeah. And then moving even more inward, the sources bring up Ian McGilchrist's work on brain hemispheres.
Ah, the left brain, right brain distinction.
Yeah. The view presented is that the left brain is good with linear logic. Details it sees the prey, metaphorically speaking. The right brain is more intuitive, nonlinear, sees the whole picture, the gestalt. It's the master.
Forest versus the trees.
Pretty much. And the key insight highlighted is that for optimal functioning, whether it's a group trying to solve a huge problem like climate change or just one person creating something complex, you need both perspectives working together.
Integrating both ways of seeing.
And apparently these differences are also linked to personality types, which can explain why collaboration is sometimes tricky. People might literally be seeing the system of the problem differently. Craft, like the technical skill, is seen as mostly left hemisphere work.
While the overall vision comes from the right, what about less tangible systems, like shared ideas?
That leads into Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphic fields.
Morphic fields. Sounds a bit out there.
Well, it's proposed as a kind of collective memory or influence, separate from individual brains. Think of it as amplifying ideas like Jung's collective unconscious or how trends spread through imitation mimetics.
Okay.
And the sources note this feels strangely relevant today with the internet. That feeling of a shared consciousness, or at least shared information and influence, seems almost tangible online, like the collective unconscious is sort of suffused in the network. Then, shifting gears slightly, there's admiration for E.O. Wilson's consilience.
Consilience, the unity of knowledge idea.
Exactly, that deep interdisciplinary thinking. The suggestion that arts and sciences aren't totally separate, that they might eventually connect back to some fundamental underlying laws.
Finding the common ground.
Yeah, and linking it back to creativity, the sources propose that innovation itself is deeply rooted in our biology, our neurological structures. Gene-culture coevolution is seen as the deep system that shaped our brains and even led to the origin of the arts.
So systems thinking goes right down to our evolutionary roots.
Seems so. And just quickly, a few others mentioned System 1 and System 2 thinking, gut instinct versus slow analysis. The U.S. is even characterized as a System 1 country, prone to snap judgment. And Wittgenstein's family resemblance idea is used to show how categories, like games, don't have one single defining feature, but a web of overlapping traits.
Like a complex system of characteristics.
Yeah.
Exactly. Plus recommendations for Christopher Alexander's A Pattern Language for Metaphorical Thinking, and Donella Meadows' Thinking in Systems as just a great book on the topic.
Okay, so we've got these large-scale natural systems, cognitive systems, social systems. How do they interact? What happens when they clash or when things go wrong?
Well, the sources make a distinction. Those really top-level systems like global climate, deep earth processes, they have huge inertia. They're incredibly hard to change quickly.
They operate on different timescales than we do.
Right. And freedom or individual agency is sometimes framed as this bottom-up force that kind of bumps up against these massive type-down systems.
The individual versus the structure.
Yeah. And prevailing ideologies are also described as these powerful top-down systems that really shape outcomes within society.
Setting the rules of the game.
And sometimes systems just don't work as planned. They produce side effects. The sources mention artificial creativity NFTs as an example, comparing the dynamics a bit to day trading. A system built for one thing ends up creating unexpected, maybe problematic results.
Right. Unintended consequences are inherent in complex systems.
Which naturally leads to the idea of randomness, uncertainty, and what Taleb called black swans, those completely unexpected high-impact events.
Things you just can't predict.
Exactly. The criminal justice system is given as one example where unpredictability is just part of it, but these black swans can pop up anywhere, even finding weird relationships between chords in music, or stumbling onto something crucial in big data. Systems aren't neat, predictable machines.
Okay, and speaking of systems that dominate our lives now, technology. The sources definitely focus on that.
Oh, absolutely. The internet, social media, they're explicitly viewed as huge systems. Networks we're all embedded in.
We live inside them, basically.
And algorithms are like the internal engines of these digital systems. The sources point out some specific effects algorithms can have.
Such as?
Well, they can kind of lock the door on self-reflection by constantly feeding you stuff that just confirms what you already think, creating echo chambers. Or They can subtly steer your behavior based on just a tiny bit of interest you showed in something.
Guiding our attention pathways.
Yeah. There's also this interesting comparison between digital processes, which are seen as potentially lumpy, constrained by the tech itself, versus analog processes, which feel smoother, more continuous. And here's a really provocative idea from the sources. Technology doesn't just serve us. It can actually redesign us as we adapt to it. Our thinking, our habits, they change to fit the shape of the tech.
We shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. That's classic systems feedback.
Exactly. And this extends to art and design, too. Contemporary creative fields are described as this large system driven by memes, tech innovation, and a lot of mimicry.
Trends feeding back on themselves.
Creating these feedback loops of what's considered cool or valuable aesthetically. Memes are described as these powerful forces like tsunamis within this system of constant redefinition. Navigating them, or even redirecting them, requires understanding that system. The sources throw in a few other interesting system concepts, too. There's this speculative idea that maybe the universe itself is a system designed with some kind of self-awareness. But it's presented as consistent with how organisms evolve dynamically within their environment, which is also a system. Then there's a very human tendency to use compartments.
Compartments.
Yeah, like operating within different systems or rule sets, depending on the situation. The classic example given is the scientist who uses empirical methods all week, but then participates in a completely different system, like religious practice, on the weekend.
Switching frameworks based on context. We all do that, I guess.
We do. And frameworks for analysis, cognitive scaffolds, these are mentioned as essential tools for dealing with complex systems. They help us organize our thoughts and get things done.
They give us a starting point.
But the sources also caution that the best or shortest path through a complex problem often only becomes clear after you've started working through it. You need the framework, but the real insight comes from the process.
You can only see the direct route in hindsight.
And circling back to creativity one more time, the combinatorial process is emphasized again, taking bits and pieces from different places, connecting fragments. That's the core of it.
Assembling something new from existing parts.
Yes. And a conceptual idea can act as the package or the waterway, the system that holds a whole group of works together, even if that concept gets refined later.
The system provides the coherence.
And one last interesting tool mentioned, dealing with complexity or paradox, especially those tricky gray areas or binary choices. There's this idea of a red box representing maybe personal will or conscious choice as a way to just cut through the ambiguity and make a decision within the system.
Let's try and connect this all back for you listening. What's the big takeaway here?
I think the main message is that looking at things through a systems lens, whether it's your own creative work, global issues, technology, even just how you think, it's an incredibly powerful framework.
It helps you see connections you might miss otherwise?
Exactly. It helps connect dots between seemingly random things, understand those complex dynamics, and maybe, just maybe, it unlocks new ways for you to think or create.
It's about seeing the underlying architecture of things.
Yeah, and having exposure to all these different models we talked about, Gaia, brain hemispheres, algorithms, cycles. It just gives you a richer toolkit for making sense of information and spotting those important patterns. So just to wrap up, we've seen how thinking in systems can fuel ongoing creativity, how various theories provide lenses for understanding systems from the planetary scale down to our own minds, and how technology acts as a massive shaping system in our lives today.
Right. The common thread is that understanding these systems, how things connect, interact, and feedback on each other, is really key to navigating complexity, both in creative pursuits and just in the world generally.
It definitely offers a different, often deeper perspective.
If creativity, as these sources suggest, is often about combining fragments, taking pieces from here and there and assembling them. And if our modern digital world is increasingly shaped by these powerful algorithmic systems and viral memes that create these intense feedback loops of values and attention,
Yeah, that system we're all swimming in.
then how does consciously understanding those systems actually help you cut through all that noise, find your own unique fragments worth saving, and figure out how to assemble them into ideas that feel genuinely meaningful and original in today's world? Something to think about.